Welcome to Exhibition. And hello, Patrick Dagg.
Hi, Richard. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm well, thank you, and delighted to see you. And your exhibition is titled Mongrel at James Macon Gallery in Melbourne. Let's go to the title, first of all, because mongrel carries with it, so many associations in all sorts of ways of, maybe dubious heritage or a slightly aggressive nature, certainly a strong ability to survive. What do you see as the characteristic of the works in this exhibition?
The title really comes from, I used to play sport a long time ago, and I used to be a rugby player, and I wasn't the best player by any means, but I had a coach who was this very strict school sergeant, and he said, "Oh, Paddy plays with mongrel, like it's good to have some mongrel in you." And I think that was in my mind when I came up with the title, because my work's not necessarily very technical. I think technical ability is great, but it's not necessarily what interests me about making art. It's sometimes just coming at with lots of different ideas and energies and sort of making marks, I guess. And the way that I was making the work was coming from, under lockdown with so many changes and chaos sort of prevailing in the world. And I wanted to take some of that energy and sort of just put it into the work. And the whole sort of idea I have around mongrel is not necessarily like around being aggressive. It's around just having a certain specific energy. I guess the energy of mongrel has a hybridity to it, so it's sort of not one sort of static thing. It's sort of a changing evolution of ideas, I guess, from previously.
You mentioned lockdown, and of course, actually, that is just as we're recording, starting to relax in Melbourne just a little, and people will, I understand, actually be able to go in and physically see your exhibition. So what do you hope they might experience as they walk into the gallery? What sort of response would you like to have from a viewer?
Hopefully they pick up some of that energy, some of that focused energy, and there's a lot of different emotions within the work. I mean, it's been a very tumultuous year for everybody, and particularly Melburnians who've really suffered a lot, I think, over the last sort of few months. And but also this sort of weird bittersweet moment for myself, because we just had our first child in March, and so we're sort of being preoccupied with this sort of raising a child, and we just moved house to sort of the suburbs, and just sort of all these brand new, really exciting moments, but also tinged with all of this sadness and uncertainty. So I think that that's sort of embedded within the work, is this great joy, but also quite a great deal of sadness, I guess.
Well, congratulations, first of all, on your family edition. But also that brings us back in a way to that mixture. You talked then about a mixture of feelings, a mixture of experiences and priorities, and your practice is very much, as you referred to earlier, that hybridization. You hybridize markmaking and collage and sampling and graffiti and of course, very obviously in the work, elements of neon. So how did that combination, that hybridization, evolve for you?
Collage is sort of based on grabbing lots of different, grabbing things out of context and then just smashing them on top of each other. And that's the part of art making that I enjoy the most. And I guess because, the work behind me is an earlier painting with oil paint. And it's got some of the paper sort of texturized behind it, and it can sort of look a little bit like sort of Markmaking graffiti. But I found sort of the limitations of paint and the formal nature of that a little bit sort of stifling. And I enjoyed sort of creating lots of different fragments to then sort of join and move around. So yeah, I guess to answer your question, sort of hybridity works for my practice because it keeps everything quite new. But I think it's almost like a drawing practice at this point as well, which I find interesting, because there's not a lot of paint in the show, even though they're termed paintings. They're made with crayon and spray can, and there's no sort of tube paint with a brush sort of involved. So yeah, I find that kind of exciting to push the medium a little bit.
How do you find that those elements, those mark-making drawn elements, and the drawings in neon, how do you find and how do you intend that they play off each other?
So I collect a lot of I take photographs of graffiti and gestures and moments that I see within the sort of landscape, the urban landscape. And I sort of just compile these big books of images. And I sort of just take moments from each of those and shift them around. And they sort of come into this drawing practice, which is quite sort of spontaneous. And this just sort of in the studio, sort of making drawings, and they're sort of flying onto the floor, and then taking a bit and tearing that and sort of just coming at an image over time, which is quite sort of loose, and then sort of formalizing that over time. With the neons, I guess the neons sort of come from those drawings, but the neon sort of, it brings the whole picture into focus a little bit more, I find.
How do you decide on the neon motifs? How do they develop?
So they're drawings as well, and like within this show, there's sort of these ongoing symbols which have been developing. So there's sort of this Bart Simpson-looking figure which has been used in other works, and it's simplifying a little bit. But the original idea behind that image was, that sort of play off between Bart and Homer, and that's sort of something I grew up watching a lot of, and I binge watched during this lockdown, and just really enjoyed the shapes of those things, and just using that as a vehicle to, discuss self, so me as Bart, and then simplifying that as a symbol. Yeah, I mean, there's a neon of Bart's, like it's like a Bart head with just a nose and a mouth. And I like the fact that the crown on the sculptural work references that, and then within that same picture, there's a drawing of the same thing. So I think I'm just drawn to sort of the shapes and just exploring that just as simply, to be honest.
How do you decide on the characters from cartoons or from broader popular culture that you decide to incorporate in the works?
Yeah, so it's sort of new to sort of be so referential with the Simpsons works, but the works that I made for Sydney Contemporary last year had some Simpsons characters in them. And that was really to do with my obsession growing up with the Simpsons, and but also that sort of play off the Homer and Bart character. So the works sort of, they're drawn off a lot of different source material, but they're also really linked to my own personal sort of history. And so I lost my dad about 13 years ago. So in those works, I was trying to sort of explore some symbols that I could sort of explore the relationship between father and son. And so Homer and Bart was a thing that, from my childhood I watched a lot of, but I could also use as symbols to not really clearly talk about that, but in my own way, sort of just reference a little bit. And then I really like that idea of just sort of charging, it's the same thing with the collage, charging something that has really nothing to do with something else with a new meaning, and then just using that as a repeated symbol.
Can we go back to some of the specifics of some of the works? And in each of the works where there are mark-making exercises combined with the neon, each work seems in many ways to be its own mark-making world, its own mark-making universe. The marks have a similarity. And yet those marks are fractured within the work by virtue of the way in which you've constructed the collage. Can you talk to us a little about that process of why and how you choose to fracture the marks that you make?
Yeah, so I mean, originally I was sort of using paint, and I was really messing up the paint marks. So I was using lots of different sort of thinners and sort of smearing and working with different gestures and brush strokes and things. And I mean, the thing with oil paint was that it would take so long to dry that I would get very frozen within a work, and I'd have to leave it for such a long time that I sort of inherited somehow along my travels a big stack of sort of A3 yellowed paper. And I just had that sitting around, and I started doing some drawings on that and some spray paint sort of imagery. And then I just enjoyed the fact that I could make lots of different segments, but then over time I could just pick them up as finished wholes and then just sort of place them. And there was a lot of control. So I think I really enjoy improvising with gesture and mark making. But I think if you don't have any sort of strong organization to that, you just get lost within that sort of chaos. So for me, I guess the pieces of paper were that organization that they were bound by their size, and I could just create as many of them as I wanted, and then I could choose the bits that I liked.
Looking at a couple of works in particular, surrounded by reflections of yourself and wherever he has gone, I have gone, those multiple color visions give an almost kind of hallucinogenic vigor to the works. But is there a self-portrait reference there, both in the titles and the nature of the works?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they're the only works without neon in them. And I sort of, the whole materiality of this show came about from just the trip to Bunnings, really. And I found these crayons, these black building crayons. And I just grabbed them and I never used them. They just sat around, and I did a drawing with them once, and I thought, oh, this looks a bit like charcoal. I quite like that. But they don't smudge at all. So that was that. And then I sort of looked into the crayons a bit more and found that these building crayons come in all sorts of crazy colors and quite fluorescent sort of colors. So I just bought a whole series of different colorful crayons. And there's sort of, those works are the same sorts of shapes, but the hair and the nose and the eyes, they're very sort of abstracted, I guess. And it allowed me to get very physical, and it was sort of deep in that sort of lockdown madness where there was no end to this sort of, and there's still, it's not over yet, but there was no sort of end to the cabin fever we were all feeling. So those works were really like frenzied and quite sort of aggressive, and that was just a release of that sort of energy, I guess. But yeah, I guess Bart as self, same thing I was saying before, a very simple symbol, but they did become portraits in some respects.
I'd like to ask you about the sculptures in this exhibition, which in the gallery itself are very strong and physically dominant presences. There's that solidity, but there's also a little bit of a sense of ephemeral decadence, covered in gold leaf and with the neon ingredients as well. Can you give us a sense of how the sculptures work for you, and how that sense of solidity is important to have in the midst of the works on the wall?
I sort of discovered styrofoam as a bit of a vehicle to make something quite quickly at like a life-size sort of scale, and involve my body, like with the paintings and the drawings, to be quite gestural. So I sort of found that I could order these huge, big, 4-meter long sheets of industrial styrofoam, and with a hot knife I could sort of slice through them like butter. And so I started just working like that, and just sort of in mostly just experimenting, just gluing it together, and they sort of turned out to be these forms. So yeah, what I'd do is I'd sort of carve them up, and you sort of can really easily make marks in them. So I could sort of push my thumbs in, and with all the ceramics that I'd made, I really enjoyed sort of molding something with my hands and then gold leafing it, because you'd pick up all of the little miniature gestures within it. So I sort of did the same thing with styrofoam. With resin, I would pour over it to make it really solid. And I enjoyed that sort of material change, to go from something so sort of flimsy and easy to sort of snap to something really solid, but still really lightweight. So yeah, that sort of, that change from something that's really pedestrian like styrofoam to then gold leafing it and making it assume a different hierarchy is definitely something which I like to explore. So previously, I mean, something like gold leaf is so steeped within, the higher sort of esteem of decorative arts. And I guess I got that from working at an auction house and being around lots of different decorative arts. I enjoyed using some of those framing models that I could sort of take garbage and take gold and then see if that could work. Do you know what I mean? Polishing a turd, let's say.
Perfect combination and perfect description.
Exactly.
I'd like to wrap up our conversation today with the titles of the works. There are intriguing titles for most of the works in this exhibition. What do you see as the role of the title as that kind of interface between the viewer and the work? And what are these titles in this exhibition all about?
I think the title's important, but I don't want to spend too much time sort of really, finding words which become a little bit contrived. So I just collect words. If I'm watching a movie, if I see something written, or if I hear it in a song, I just collect these phrases and put them into my phone, and they sort of add up over 6 months. And then when it comes time to show work, I start selecting them, and they sort of just match up quite sort of easily and honestly. But I enjoy the fact that they can be quite ambiguous. So someone can look at a title and look at a work, and then they can do this sort of work, and they can take their own experience and sort of, they can come to some other, realization with the work. But they're mostly song titles. So you could probably Google them and see what I've been listening to, which, I listen to a lot of music while I'm making work. And, I think it's that sampling nature of just taking lots of different pieces from all over the place and then just joining them together.
So to take a couple of examples, Show Me Love When I Feel Defeated, and All Things Eat and Are Eaten. Do you recall where they came from?
Yeah, so All Things Eat and Are Eaten is a brand new album by an artist called Adrienne Lenker, and she's from Big Thief. And that came out very recently, like last week. And it's such a beautiful record that really, I think for me, summarized this last sort of 6 months of tumultuous chaos. And it was just very sort of, that line just really stood out for me, particularly because we just lost my uncle in the UK, who just passed away. And with this big divide that we can't sort of see each other, and we're going to online funerals, and All Things Eat and Are Eaten really came back down to like the pure facts of, we're all sort of, we're here and then we're gone. And that work sort of just came down to that. And the other one, I believe, is a rapper called Medhane, who I enjoy. And I just like to listen to lots of different kinds of music, and they all sort of just flow into the work somehow. I think it's, the titles are just sort of little signifiers to me.
Well, once again, Patrick, congratulations to you and to your partner on your new child, and also on this exhibition. Thanks for sharing it with us.
I appreciate it. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.